And this one officer, you could actually see the color leave his face. And he said, "You're the one that wrote that over there?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, and I mean, tears were coming down. He said, "You're the one that let me know I don't have to die to be appreciated."
Vivian Eney Cross would go on to leave a permanent mark on one of America's most sacred monuments. But in August of 1984, she was just a wife waiting for her husband to come home from a training exercise.
So let's go back to that fateful day, Vivian. It's August 24th, 1984. Your husband is U.S. Capitol Police Sergeant Chris Eney. Unfortunately, in a training exercise, he was shot and killed, not by a criminal, but unfortunately by a fellow officer, in fact, a friend. He left behind, of course, you and your two young daughters. Our guest today on Heroes Behind the Badge is Vivian Eney Cross. And what she did with that grief, that unbelievable grief, what she built from it, that's the story that we're going to tell today. That's the conversation that you need to hear. If you've ever visited D.C., the Law Enforcement Memorial Wall, Judiciary Square in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, there are over 24,000 names inscribed on that wall of fallen officers. Okay? But there's also an inscription, and there are 4 lions that guard the memorial wall. And one of the lions on the northwest side of the memorial has an inscription, and it's important to know what that was. It's not how these officers died that made them heroes. It's how they lived. And I've been to the memorial hundreds of times. I saw the inscription, I saw the name, but I never was able to put it with a face. So today, finally, that is your inscription. It is inscribed on the marble walls of the Law Enforcement Memorial. So I'd like to start today by asking you about Chris. On Heroes Behind the Badge podcast, we talk about people who've done heroic things, people who have paid the ultimate price, but we oftentimes don't talk about how they lived. Let's take it right from your quote. Talk to us about Chris and how he lived.
He was a good man. He had integrity. And we met in high school, dated on and off. And then after high school, he joined the Army with my brother. And he went into Green Berets. And he was a Special Forces medic that he never left the United States. It was the height of the war. So it just, God must have said, no, not this time. So he did that. And then after he got back, we got pregnant, and then he wanted to look for a serious job. And there was a gentleman at our church that was a deputy chief, Yancey Garner, and he knew him and talked to him, and he was the influence for him to go on over to Capitol Police and to get on that department.
Interesting. How long had he served? How long was he at Capitol Police? Yeah.
12 and a half years.
12 and a half years. What do you recall any of his recollections about what it was like to police the U.S. Capitol? One of the most prestigious police positions you can have. How did he feel about that?
He was very serious about his job there. He had the privilege of guarding and keeping the U.S. Capitol, and it was an honor for him to do that.
Indeed. Craig Floyd, one of our co-hosts. Hey, Craig. Hello, Craig.
Dennis.
And Billy's here too, Billy Erfurt. We got the whole crew here for Vivian. Everybody showed up. Craig has some particularly poignant memories He has a lot of history. Obviously, he's the founder of the memorial and had a long history there. And you and Craig know each other pretty well. I'd love to hear Craig and you maybe have some conversations about some of the things that you guys experienced together.
Let me start with a story very briefly, but so powerful, and for me especially. I had the privilege of working for Congressman Mario Biaggi, who introduced the bill to authorize a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial to be built. And that happened in 1984, the same year Vivian's husband, Chris, died in the line of duty. And so a year later, in May, there was a group called Concerns of Police Survivors that was fledgling. It had just started. Susie Sawyer was their founder and executive director. And Susie said, Craig, come and talk to this group of surviving family members that had gathered really for the first time in Washington, D.C. for National Police Week, and tell them about this memorial that Congressman Biaggi has now authorized through law. And so I gave a nice speech about the new law, about this memorial that was going to be built to honor the men and women who had died in the line of duty. And I felt pretty good. Got a nice ovation. I think people were pretty happy with the message I delivered. Went back to my office, and a couple hours later, the phone rings. And it's Vivian Eney calling me. And I thought, she's a survivor. I'm sure she's going to thank me and say all these nice things. That didn't actually happen. Vivian was rather angry, rather bitter. She had lost her husband. I had told her how much America cared, how much Congress cared, and that's why we are building this memorial. And Vivian's experience was not so positive. She did not feel that those words really were authentic and true. And she more or less read me the riot act a bit, vented, and I was the target, but I knew she wasn't venting at me. She was just getting it off her system. But Vivian taught me something very important that day. She explained to me how many cards and letters and phone calls she had gotten from members of Congress, from others, and how much that meant to her. And I thought to myself, my goodness, if a condolence card or a phone call could mean so much to a survivor who's lost a loved one, how much would a national monument mean, a national memorial? And for the first time, I think I fully appreciated the importance of the project that I'd been handed by Congressman Biaggi. He said, go out and build this memorial. And until then, it was just one of many projects, one of many issues I was working on for him. But all of a sudden, that project rose to the top of the heap, and it became really my life's calling after that, meeting people like Vivian. She started it, and I met thousands of survivors and officers after that reinforced her message that this memorial was, in fact, very important. But Vivian, I'd like you to go back and talk to us about the difference between the way survivors were treated in 1984, 1985, how they're treated today, and how these fallen heroes are honored today versus what was happening back in 1984 when there was no memorial.
Good question.
Yes. Well, Chris's death with Capitol Police started a nightmare that the department or my family didn't get out of quickly. The first inkling I had that anything was wrong was a phone call. I was told Chris was shot and to sit tight, somebody would pick me up and take me down to where he was. Well, I'm putting on my makeup, thinking we're going to laugh about him being shot in the foot or something. That was about as far as it went. And they did send the officer, and he took me to the wrong hospital. And by the time I got to the right hospital, Chris was dead. And it just got worse from there. So many ways in the DC area, you fall through the cracks. We lived in Maryland, but there were no Maryland death benefits. He worked in DC, but not for DC, and there were no benefits. And with Capitol Police, their legislative and the other federal officers are judicial. And although they all give monetary for comp time and annual leave, legislative did not. So he had over 1,000 hours of comp time that they wouldn't pay me for.
Hmm.
And it was just crazy. Chris and I were not prepared. I mean, everything was in his name. And I ended up having to pay inheritance tax on what was mine because my name wasn't on any of the documents.
Wow.
It was just blow after blow after blow. And it really takes you to your knees. And then when a department isn't prepared, it's additional trauma. They're not when it comes for a line of duty death and they haven't prepared, they react instead of act. And that's when a lot of those other traumas will occur. And I was so angry and so bitter for such a long time. And it was finally my preacher during a sermon said, being bitter is like taking poison and waiting for somebody else to die. And I thought,
Wow.
that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm waiting for somebody else to die. And that's when I thought, I've got to get better. I've got to get my girls through this. We all have to get through it together.
I mean, how old were Shannon and Heather, your two daughters, at the time of Chris's death?
They were 9 and 11.
9 and 11. Here's another memory I have, and you can talk about it. You and your two 9 and 11-year-old daughters going door to door on Capitol Hill, telling members of Congress that you were not able to get any federal death benefit. There was a federal death benefit in place at the time. It was authorized in 1976, $50,000 at the time for any surviving family member of an officer who died in the line of duty. But it only applied to state and local officers. And you had to go and tell members of Congress who Chris worked for to protect that you were not getting those benefits. You and your daughters were not part of that legislation. So tell me, and then that even became more of a nightmare. Explain that and
Yes.
that journey.
Yes, it was when I was told there was the PSOB, it had been written and unintentionally did not include federal officers. And so they said, hang on, we're going to make it better. We're going through to rewrite it now. And so they did that. And they made it retroactive to September 1st, 1984. And Chris was killed in October 24th, 1984.
August 24th, yes.
Yeah, so it was not available to me.
Unbelievable.
So, of course, the police officers on Capitol Hill, they were really talking it up with senators and congressmen. I went around with the girls and I handed a letter to everybody on the Hill. And it took over 2 years to get that personal relief bill so that I could have access to that benefit, which I felt was mine to have. I didn't want anything wasn't due me, but I felt it was mine to get and help with the girls.
You talked about the pastor helping you get through your grief and bitterness. There was another group that played a role in that, I know, and that's the concerns of police survivors, cops. I mentioned Susie Sawyer, who started that group in 1984, and you were one of the first members. You probably attended the first survivor meeting of cops in 1985. Talk about cops. You went on to serve as their national president for 2 years, not just one as is typical. 3 years, my goodness. All right. So you were there for 3 years as their president early on. Mm-hmm. Talk about how cops helped you and what cops does for other survivors.
Well, one of the first things it does is you go there and somebody will come up to you and ask you about the incident that took your loved one's life, and they will say, I know. And you know that they know because they're police survivors. And to hear somebody say that and realize they really do know what I'm going through was tremendous. Just to be able to talk to other survivors. Some had had it worse than I did. Some had had it much better, but it brought levelness to the whole survivor issue because we were all there together. And it was just great. It really helped in me getting rid of that bitterness and that anger. And I just felt that, well, I'm not doing any good to myself or my girls while I'm like this. But if I walk away from that bitterness, it helps me help others who are going through the same thing.
Yeah.
And Vivian, let me jump in and ask you, so how did you help some people? I'd like to hear you. You talked about some had it worse, some had it better. There's probably some really significant moving stories that maybe are worth sharing.
Yes, one I think of, excuse me, is Judy Welsh. Her husband was a DC police officer that he went into the it's off what street? I can't think. 14th Street. Anyway, a woman who had escaped St. Elizabeth's had run to the bridge and jumped off the bridge, and he went in after her, but he never surfaced. And Judy was 8.5 months pregnant when he died. And she had really so much support from the agency that it really helped her. I went with her when she went to see her husband, and down the road, her brother died overseas. They're really not sure what caused it. I think it was he was involved in a band that was really kind of living on the wild side. But I went with her to see her brother. And you do that. You call them on days that you think maybe they want to hear somebody else's voice that knows, and it is just so meaningful. Let me tell you a story. When my daughter Heather got up the day that Chris was killed, there on the kitchen table were two erasers that Chris had gotten her for her brand new chalkboard. So she sat down and wrote this thank you letter, thanking him for getting them for her. And of course, he never got the letter. He was killed that day. And if you fast forward maybe 4 or 5 years later, and we're in the car, and Heather says, Mom, you got to listen to this song. And she turned it up, and I'm aging myself. It was Mike and the Mechanics, The Living Years. And the voice came on, the verse came on that said, I wasn't home that morning. My father passed away. I didn't get to tell him all the things I had to say. And so I grabbed her hand and I said, well, Heather, what would you have said to your dad? And she said, I would have asked him to watch over me. I would have asked him to love me every day, but I would have thanked him for my erasers. And with that, she started to cry. And so I held her hand and we got to where we were going. But when I got back to the house, I called another survivor who knew what those moments were like, who would talk me through it, not pity me. Pity is a wasted emotion. Just help me be and do what I need to for myself and my girls and others that are going through this. And so it's just this camaraderie that is based on an event that ties you together completely. And Sometimes I would call people and ask for help. Sometimes they would call me, but it was a network of resources to find those people who really get you and can help you become what you need to be for your family.
Yeah. Dennis and Bill, I want to summarize a little bit of why Vivian's place in 1985 was a little different than what a survivor's position might be today.
Mhm,
You know, no death benefit, all right, for at least federal
mhm,
officers when Chris died. There was just a new group called Concerns of Police Survivors, but
mhm,
nobody yet was calling each other. There was no
mhm,
network of support that exists today, as Vivian describes. There was no National Law Enforcement
mhm,
Officers
mhm,
Memorial because it wasn't dedicated until 1991. Chris died in
mhm,
1984. And, so much has changed. There was no National Law
mhm,
Enforcement Museum. And the
mhm.
way we honor officers today is just so incredibly different and better
Yes,
than it was
yes.
when Vivian was going through this grief. And I just want people to understand that's why,
Mhm,
survivors back in the day maybe felt neglected, felt like nobody
mhm,
cared, nobody remembered.
mhm,
And that's what Vivian taught me. And that's why I
mhm,
think that memorial has become so special. That museum, the cops group,
mhm,
the death benefit, which today I think is well over $300,000 because they
mhm,
put in a cost of living adjustment. So it is
mhm.
meaningful. And then there was
Yes.
another group that came along and helped you, Vivian. It was a group called Heroes.
Yes.
A lot of groups similar to Heroes are called 100 clubs or 200 clubs
Mhm,
around the country.
mhm.
Talk to me about what Heroes is and what it did for you and the girls.
Well, they stay low key. At some point after your husband's death, you will go in to see them, and then they will let you know what they will be able to do for you. Not in the emotional realm, but in the realm of benefits, of house payments, and just a whole bunch of stuff they're able to do. And of course, it depends on the needs of the survivors.
And this
And
is
I think,
just so people understand, this is a group of business leaders in the
yes.
local community who have
Hmm.
put forth money to assist
Hmm.
surviving family members of public safety officers killed in the line of duty. So these are private
Hmm.
individuals. They don't want a lot of
Yes.
glory or recognition, as Vivian mentioned, but they do assist you in a meaningful way.
Oh, absolutely. I believe they started after President Kennedy was shot. And at the same time, there was an officer shot. And back then, the only way you could get some support financially was having it in the newspaper or on the radio. And this officer got nothing because the airways were just full of Kennedy and all that was going on with that death. And they are just wonderful. I cannot tell you how good they are. I mean, they just listen to you. They very quietly tell you what they're going to do, and they do it.
Well,
Like,
Vivian,
I, I have a
yeah.
question.
I want to just go back because it's kind of left me still wondering and wanting to ask a couple questions. So,
Uh-huh.
clearly a lot of the benefits have changed over the years. I mean, here in
Yes.
Florida, and officers killed in the line of duty, there's so many different organizations that step up
Mhm,
financially. They fund your children's college education and
mhm,
whatnot. So you took your two daughters around Congress and you met with all
mhm.
these folks. And I don't know, did you ever get that resolved? Did you ever get that money? And did it ever lead to benefits for everybody in the future there?
No. No, certainly they are handling survivors much, much different. I mean, much, much better. It is day and night different. They've got they've got liaison officers now full time who do this stuff for survivors. Anything that comes up, they'll ask you if you want to go to it. The Capitol Police has become my family. They are wonderful. They were just not aware, not prepared for line of duty death. And when it happened, things went haywire. But oh, yeah, the survivors. And of course, there's been other survivors at Capitol Police since Chris died. And although no survivor is ever going to say, I'm happy completely with how they handled me, because you're wrapped around this intense grief that comes at first. It just plows into you. And that part is difficult. But boy, do they treat those survivors better. And I am so glad they've got a wonderful group of officers who really take care of us. And it's amazing.
You've heard how she survived. In part 2, you'll hear how she shaped the memorial that stands today and the words inscribed on its wall.